Folks at home, welcome back to the Crimson Oak Pond, and when I built this pond 2 years ago, I had one goal in mind, and that was to raise big bass. So after the pond build was complete, my plan was to stock it full of bait fish, add the bass, fertilize the pond, and sit back and watch them grow. Seemed pretty simple, but man was I wrong. Pond management can be a little tougher than it looks. We had the emergence of several different types of aquatic vegetation, as well as different filamentous algae that were difficult to get rid of. We also had some extremely dense plankton and zooplankton blooms that threatened the dissolved oxygen in the pond. And at one point, the water cleared up so much we had over 12 feet of visibility. So I quickly learned that having a pond is like playing a game of chess, but I'm always up for a challenge. So we will be talking about some of the successes and failures over the past couple years. And the best way to determine how successful you are at managing a pond is by looking at the growth rates of the bass that live in it. And if the majority of the fish in your pond are nice and thick, then you know you have good water quality and abundance of forage, as well as a good habitat for them to live in. And on the opposite end, if your bass are real skinny, your pond could be overcrowded or not have sufficient forage fish, and you could even have issues with water quality. But years ago, fisheries biologists came up with this term called relative weight, and it's become the new standard. And the process is simple. Whenever a bass reaches a certain length, it should have an expected weight. And if you look at this table here, we have the length on the left side, and let's just say, for instance, a bass is 15 inches long. That means if you look at that highlighted column, that an average healthy bass would weigh 1.83 pounds. Now, if your bass weighs more than that, then its relative weight will be over 100%, and if it weighs less than that, it'll be less than 100%. So we're going to start back in the beginning, back in 2023, when we first started weighing the fish, and look at some of the relative weights, and we're going to see how our bass stack up. So we first started getting weights and lengths back in the spring of 23, and as you can see with that highlighted column, all of our bass were in real good shape. But there are a couple things to preface about relative weight. So obviously this is going to fluctuate throughout the year with the bass spawn and other factors. But your target range is around 90%. If you have a bass that is 90%, that's a good healthy fish. So anything around that 100% or above is outstanding. But as you can see, we were doing really good in the beginning. That's because the pond had an abundance of bait fish before we ever added the bass. So it was literally like a buffet for them that first year. And as we continue on through 2023, the majority of the relative weights are above 100%. So by looking at this, we'll have to say that first year's weights were above average. But as we were creating this document, I remembered that we weighed and measured Bonnie and Clyde when we added them to the 5-acre pond. So I had to go check out their relative weight. And it was very surprising that Clyde's relative weight was higher than Bonnie's. So when we had them in the aquariums and even the backyard pond, Bonnie was always the bigger bass. Obviously because she was a female, but it turns out Mr. Clyde liked hitting the shiners a little bit more than Bonnie did. So it's really cool to see that even raising fish in an aquarium and a backyard pond, if you feed them enough, those relative weights can exceed 100%.